My name is Marcus Hale, and I worked security at the Northline Galleria for exactly 6 weeks before I understood that some places never truly close. They just learn to feed differently. What I'm documenting here isn't for employee training or insurance purposes. It's because I need someone to know what really happens in that mall after midnight, and why the rules they give you aren't suggestions. The Northline Galleria sits like a beached whale just off a choked service road south of Detroit, its glass-topped spine cracked and patched with blue tarps that snap in the wind like broken sails. The anchor stores, Hudson's, Sears, and Montgomery Ward that closed before I was born, stand gutted, their security gates pulled down like heavy eyelids. Fountains that once sparkled with pennies and wishes now hold only broken glass and the occasional pigeon feather. The directory maps, faded to ghosts by years of sunlight through cracked skylights, still promise stores that haven't existed since the Clinton administration. I took the job because I needed steady money and night shifts fit around my sister Emma's school schedule. Our mother had suffered a stroke 8 months earlier, leaving me responsible for a 17-year-old with college applications to finish and a future I couldn't afford to mess up. The security agency was desperate for coverage. The Galleria burned through guards like a broken furnace burns through oil, and the mall's owner, some LLC buried in paperwork 3 states away, just wanted a body there for liability purposes. The day supervisor, Mr. Kavanaugh, had nicotine-yellow fingers and eyes that never quite met mine when he spoke. He operated out of what used to be a storage closet near the old Spencer's, fitted with a folding table, a bank of monitors showing feeds from cameras that worked maybe half the time, and a coffee maker that looked like it had survived the Carter administration. Pretty straightforward, Kavanaugh said, handing me a security company lanyard, a heavy maglite that had seen better decades, and a sheet of paper folded into careful thirds. Walk the property, check the doors, make sure nobody's burning shopping carts or shooting up in the anchor stores. Standard stuff. He paused, tapping ash from a cigarette into a styrofoam cup. Oh, and follow these. He nodded toward the folded paper. Follow these exactly and you'll see morning. The way he said it, not you'll be fine or you'll make it through your shift, but you'll see morning, should have been my first warning. But I needed the job, and weird supervisors came with the territory and security work. I unfolded the paper and read, Northline Galleria, night security protocols do not. Look into storefront mirrors after 2:17 a.m. If the carousel music plays, you must be at the food court by the second refrain. Do not acknowledge anyone calling you by your full name unless they show a valid security badge. At 3:33 a.m., you will hear knocking from inside the Sunset Cinemas. Count to 40 before unlocking. Never count out loud. If you find a child mannequin standing in the concourse, turn it to face the service corridor. Don't look away until it's finished turning back. The skylight in the east atrium shows weather that isn't there. Don't check your phone for confirmation. Never feed the pigeons. If you see 2 of the same person, the one that blinks is the one you ignore. I looked up from the list, expecting Kavanaugh to be grinning, waiting for me to call out the hazing ritual for what it obviously was. Instead, he was watching me with the expression of a man who delivered bad news to too many people and had run out of ways to soften it. This is a joke, right? I said. What is this urban legend stuff? Don't feed the pigeons. What am I, a park ranger? Kavanaugh didn't smile. He stubbed out his cigarette and stood up, brushing ash from his uniform shirt. You start at midnight. Radio coverage gets scratchy near the cinema, so don't rely on it if you need help. Keep moving, stick to the schedule, follow the list. He paused at the door. The last guy lasted 3 nights. The one before him made it almost a week. What happened to them? They stopped following the list. After he left, I sat in the cramped office reading the rules again, trying to make sense of what felt like the product of someone's overactive imagination, mixed with genuine mental illness. Carousel music? Child mannequins? Whether that wasn't there, it read like a creepypasta, written by someone who'd watched too many mall horror movies, but I folded the paper and put it in my shirt pocket anyway. Weird job, weird rules. I'd worked stranger places for worse pay. The mall settled around me as evening faded to night, making the sounds old buildings make when the day's heat leaves their bones. Somewhere in the distance, a pigeon cooed from the rafters of what used to be the food court. Wind whistled through gaps in the skylights, carrying the smell of the Detroit River and something else, something organic and stale, like flowers left too long in water. I checked my watch, 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until my shift officially started. 13 minutes until I'd learned that some rules aren't meant to protect you from the danger. They're meant to teach the danger how to feed without breaking its teeth. Outside, graffiti covered the loading dock walls in layers of tags and territorial markings, but one symbol appeared over and over, sprayed in red paint that looked fresh despite the mall's obvious abandonment. A circle with a vertical slash through it, like a keyhole turned on its side. Or like an eye that had learned to wink. I shouldered my radio, picked up the flashlight and stepped into the concourse to begin my first patrol. The North Line Galleria stretched ahead of me, like the ribcage of some massive, sleeping thing, and I was about to learn what lived in its chest cavity. Behind me, one of the security monitors flickered and went dark. Then another. By the time I reached the first storefront, they were all showing nothing but static, as if the mall had decided it preferred privacy for what came next. My first patrol felt like walking through a museum of American retail death. Storefronts that once blazed with neon and promise now stood dark behind security gates painted with territorial tags. The Gap, Victoria's Secret Radio Shack, names that had once meant something reduced to ghost letters on faded awnings. My footsteps echoed off tiles that had once guided millions of shoppers toward their desires, now cracked and sprouting weeds through gaps where the grout had failed. The fountain at the mall's heart sat dry and littered with broken glass that caught my flashlight beam like scattered stars. Pennies had oxidized to green in the corners where water had once pooled. Wishes turned to verdigris. Above me, the skylights were a patchwork of intact glass and blue tarps that shifted and rustled in the wind, casting moving shadows that made the empty spaces feel occupied. I followed my assigned route, North Anchor to South Anchor, checking doors, noting broken windows, documenting the slow decay that ate shopping centers from the inside out. The radio on my belt crackled occasionally with distant chatter from other guards at other properties, but their voices seemed to come from another world, one where security work meant catching shoplifters and dealing with teenagers, not whatever this was turning into. At 2 a.m., I passed the old Brookstone and felt the first sign that the North Line Galleria operated under different physics than the rest of Detroit. The air moved wrong. Not wind, buildings always have drafts, but movement that seemed intentional, curious. Like breath, if breath could see. Dust motes swirled in my flashlight beam with patterns too complex for random air currents. They formed spirals, figure eights, shapes that looked almost like letters before dissolving back into chaos. I stopped walking and watched them dance. And for a moment I could swear they were trying to spell something. My watch read 2:19 a.m., 2 minutes past the mirror deadline. That's when I remembered. Rule No. 1, do not look into storefront. Mirrors after 2:17 a.m. I'd been walking past. Mirror-lined boutiques for the last several minutes, without thinking about it. Old habits from a lifetime of mirrors being just mirrors, reflecting nothing more dangerous than your own face and whatever stood behind you. But now the rule burned in my mind like a brand, and I became hyper-aware of every reflective surface around me. The old dress barn had a long wall mirror that ran the length of its interior, visible through the security gate's gaps. I'd glanced at it without thinking as I passed, and now I found myself trying to remember what I'd seen. My own reflection, certainly. The empty mall behind me, but had there been something else? Some detail that didn't match what my eyes had actually been looking at. A soft hum threaded through the air, so low I felt it more than heard it. The mall's HVAC system had died years ago, according to Kavanaugh, but there was definitely something moving air through the concourses, something that made the dust dance and the tarps flutter, and my skin prickle with the sensation of being observed. That's when I heard my name. Marcus Hale. The voice came from behind me, soft and familiar. It sounded like my mother on one of her good days, before the stroke, when her voice still carried the authority that had guided me through childhood. Warm, concerned, slightly disappointed, the tone she'd used when I'd done something that wasn't quite wrong but wasn't quite right either. I turned around. The concourse stretched empty behind me, shadows pooling between the defunct storefronts like black water. No one there. No one anywhere. Just the dust motes spinning their impossible, patterns and the feeling that something had been watching me learn my first lesson. Reflex made me look back, toward the dress barn mirror to see if anyone was reflected there who hadn't been standing in the real space. The rule screamed in my head, "Don't look, don't look." It's past 2:17, but my eyes were already moving, already focusing on the glass. In the reflection, the skylight above me showed bright afternoon sunlight instead of tarps and darkness. Blue sky with white clouds and seagulls wheeling in lazy circles, as if the mall existed in some perpetual summer day instead of a February night in Detroit. The image was so clear, so perfectly normal, that for a moment I forgot where I was, and I wasn't alone in the reflection. At the far end of the concourse, where my actual vision showed only empty space and shadow, a figure stood in the mirror's version of reality. Thin, angular, wearing what looked like a dark coat that hung on their frame like wet plastic. They were perhaps 50 yards away in the reflection, but I could see them clearly. Or rather, I could see their silhouette, their outline, the space they occupied. Their face remained indistinct, but their body language was unmistakable. They were looking directly at me. As I watched, the figure raised one hand in a gesture that wasn't quite a wave and wasn't quite a beckoning motion, more like an acknowledgement. Like they were saying, "I see you seeing me." The hum in the air grew louder and the taste of pennies filled my mouth, metallic and sharp, like I'd been sucking on copper wire. My hands started to shake, and the flashlight beam wavered across the mirror's surface, making the reflected figure flicker like a film projection. I jerked my eyes away from the mirror and backed down the concourse. The rule hammering in my skull, "Don't look into storefront mirrors after 2:17 a.m. Don't look, don't look, don't look." Whatever was in there wanted me to see it, wanted me to understand that the mall had its own version of reality, running parallel to the one I thought I was patrolling. The hum stopped. The air went still. The taste of pennies faded, leaving only the stale smell of old retail space and pigeon droppings. I didn't look at another mirror for the rest of that patrol, but I could feel them watching me from every storefront I passed. Each piece of reflective glass became a potential window into the mall's other self, the version where it was still alive, and someone was always standing at the far end of the concourse, raising their hand in that ambiguous gesture. When I finally made it back to the security office, I pulled out the rule sheet and read it again. Rule number 1 suddenly felt less like hazing and more like survival instruction. Someone had learned the hard way not to look into mirrors after 2:17 a.m., and they'd written it down so the next person might avoid whatever they'd seen. I folded the paper and put it back in my pocket, and tried not to think about the figure in the reflection, or why they'd seemed so familiar, despite their face being hidden in shadow. Tried not to wonder if they were still there, waiting in every mirror, ready to wave at the next person who forgot to follow the rules. Outside, the wind picked up, and the tarps over the skylights snapped like flags. The sound echoed through the empty mall like applause, as if something was pleased that I'd learned my first lesson. The radio crackled, static and distant voices from other properties, other guards dealing with ordinary problems in ordinary places. I envied them more than I'd ever envied anyone in my life. On my second night, I met Darren Walsh and learned that some people are destined to become object lessons. Darren was a contract cleaner, maybe 45 years old, with the kind of confidence that comes from 20 years of working nights in empty buildings. He showed up around 1:30 a.m. in a maintenance van that had seen better decades, hauling industrial cleaning supplies, and the attitude of someone who'd seen it all. His company had a contract to keep the mall presentable for whatever inspections or insurance requirements kept the lights on and the doors theoretically ready for business. "You must be the new guy," he said, extending a hand stained with years of chemical exposure. "Heard you got the full spook treatment from Kavanaugh. Let me guess. Don't look in mirrors, don't count out loud some bullshit about carousel music." I nodded, unsure how much to share about my first night's education in the mall's particular physics. Darren laughed and rattled his keyring like a charm. "Management fairy tales, man. They gotta make it sound scary, or you new guys would just sleep in the office all night. I've been cleaning this place for 3 years, and I can tell you exactly what every mysterious sound is. Copper pipes popping when the temperature changes, river wind echoing through the ductwork, pigeons getting into the walls, basic building maintenance stuff." He gestured toward the empty storefronts, with the casual dismissal of someone explaining simple magic tricks. Half these stores still have power running to them for the emergency systems. Old fixtures creak, security gates settle, fluorescent ballasts make noise even when the tubes are dead. Add some urban legends and you've got yourself a haunted mall. Darren's certainty was almost infectious. In the harsh work lights he'd set up, the mall looked less like a supernatural feeding ground and more like what it officially was, a dying commercial property maintained just enough to avoid being condemned. His explanations made sense. His confidence felt genuine, and I wanted desperately to believe him. "What about the rules?" I asked, pulling out the folded sheet. He skimmed the list and shook his head. "Classic stuff. Make the new guy paranoid about mirrors, so he pays attention to his surroundings. Give him specific times to be in specific places, so he actually does his rounds instead of hiding in the office. Basic psychology dressed up as ghost stories." Darren pocketed the list and went back to setting up his equipment. "I'll prove it to you. Watch this place for a few nights and you'll see. It's just a dead mall with good acoustics and management that likes to mess with people's heads." At 2:40 a.m., as if summoned by his skepticism, faint music drifted through the concourses. Warped calliope notes, thin and tinny, like a music box played through broken speakers. The melody was instantly recognizable despite the distortion. Carousel music, the ancient, hypnotic tune that had sold dreams to children for generations. It was coming from the food court. Rule number 2 blazed in my mind. If the carousel music plays, you must be at the food court by the second refrain. "You hear that?" I asked Darren. He paused in his work, head tilted. "Hear what?" The music continued, growing slightly louder as it moved into the second verse. I could picture the carousel that sat in the food court's center. Plastic horses with cracked paint and tarnished brass poles, padlocked and silent for years. Yet the music was undeniably coming from that direction, threading through the empty spaces like smoke. "The carousel music," I said. "Rule number 2, oh, come on." Darren rolled his eyes and deliberately stayed where he was, near the East Atrium. "It's probably just a security system doing a sound check, or some automated thing they forgot to disconnect. Watch. I'll prove there's nothing supernatural about your precious rules." He pulled out his phone and flicked on its flashlight, aiming the beam up toward the tarped skylight above us. "Rule 6, right? The skylight shows weather that isn't there. Let me show you what you're really seeing." Through the gaps in the blue tarp, his phone's light revealed what looked like heavy snow falling outside, thick, silent flakes drifting past the glass in perfect vertical lines. It was beautiful, hypnotic even, like being inside a snow globe. "Bad weather tonight," Darren said with a grin. "Look, hail in July." He was joking, of course. It was February, but the snow outside looked wrong for Michigan winter. Too heavy, too perfect, too much like a movie effect. The carousel music reached its second refrain, the part where the melody loops back on itself, where children would laugh and parents would wave from the sidelines. Rule number 2 screamed at me to be at the food court, to be there now, to follow the instruction without question or delay. I started walking, then jogging, then running toward the food court as the music began to bend and warp, taking on harmonics that no carousel had ever produced. Behind me, Darren called out, "Yo, Marcus, check this out." I turned while still moving toward the food court and saw something that turned my blood to ice water. 2 Darrens stood in the East Atrium beneath the tarped skylight, 2 identical figures in the same maintenance uniform, holding the same phone with its bright flashlight beam. They stood side by side, maybe half a step apart, like mirror images that had been slightly offset. The Darren on the left blinked normally, his eyes tracking my movement with the natural rhythm of human attention. The Darren on the right didn't blink at all. His face was slack with a dawning, terrible wonder, as if he was seeing something that rewrote his understanding of reality. Rule number 8. If you see 2 of the same person, the one that blinks is the one you ignore. I looked away immediately and kept running toward the food court, forcing myself not to acknowledge the blinking Darren who was tracking my movement, who was probably calling my name, who was probably trying to get me to stop and look and recognize him as the real one. The carousel sat in the food court's center, exactly as I'd remembered it. Horses frozen mid-gallop, poles green with age, the whole apparatus surrounded by a chain-link barrier that had been padlocked for years. But the music was definitely coming from it, rising from speakers that couldn't possibly be connected to anything. I reached the carousel just as the second refrain began to fade. Without thinking, acting on instinct and growing desperation, I reached through the chain link and put my hand on the central column, the brass pole that rose from the carousel's heart to its canopy. The music shivered, wavered, then settled into a calmer rhythm. Lights embedded in the carousel's base blinked once, twice, then died, leaving only the echo of melody hanging in the food court's dusty air. A minute later, Darren appeared at the edge of the food court. Just one Darren now, walking with his normal gait, phone still in hand. But something was wrong with his smile. It sat on his face like he'd learned it from watching other people smile, like he was practicing an expression he didn't quite understand. "Told you it's just pipes," he said, but his voice didn't sit right in his mouth. The words came out with slightly wrong emphasis, as if he was translating from another language in real time. I stared at him, trying to determine which one he was, the blinking Darren or the one who'd stared with terrible wonder. But looking directly at him felt dangerous now, like I might teach him something he wasn't supposed to know about being human. "Yeah," I said finally, "just pipes." But I kept my distance from him for the rest of the night, and I noticed he'd developed a new habit. He blinked too much now, as if overcompensating, as if he'd learned that blinking was important, but hadn't quite figured out the proper rhythm. When his shift ended at 6 a.m., he gathered his equipment with mechanical precision and loaded it into his van without the casual conversation that had marked our earlier interactions. Before he left, he turned to me with that learned smile and said, "See you tomorrow night, Marcus Hale." He'd never used my full name before. And rule number 3 specifically warned against acknowledging anyone who called you by your full name unless they showed a valid security badge. Darren drove away in his maintenance van, but I had the growing certainty that whoever was behind the wheel wasn't the same person who'd arrived that night with explanations for everything and confidence in his own skepticism. The mall had taught him the cost of ignoring the rules, and now something else was wearing his face, learning his mannerisms, practicing being human by blinking too much and smiling like it had watched videos of people being happy. I spent the rest of my shift avoiding mirrors and trying not to think about what happened to the original Darren, the one who'd been so certain that everything had a rational explanation. The incident with Darren, or whatever was wearing Darren's face now, sent me digging through the security office like an archaeologist, searching for answers in the layers of previous shifts. The file cabinet in the corner stuck when I tried to open it, the metal runners warped by years of humidity and neglect, but persistence and a crowbar from the maintenance closet finally persuaded it to give up its contents. Inside, I found 15 years of incident reports, most of them photocopies of photocopies, the text growing fainter with each generation, like memories degrading over time. The reports were largely unsigned, just initials, dates, and descriptions of events that read like fever dreams. 15-2009, 0347 HRs, heard counting from cinema area, investigated, door warm to touch, did not open. JW7-22-2011, 0233 HRs, child's laughter from fountain area, no children present. Checked basement access locked. Note, do not count out loud. It hears the rhythm. MP 11-8-2013, 0157 chars. 2 versions of day cleaner observed. Followed protocol rule 8. Day cleaner reported missing next morning. New cleaner started following week. Horitis 1-3-2016, 0401 HRs. Mirror in Spencer's showing summer day full parking lot. Observed customers shopping. Did not recognize any faces. Avoided eye contact. Decay. The margins of these reports contained additional notes in different handwriting, as if each guard had inherited the files and added their own observations. The quarter nights are worst refers to first night of each quarter. Mall's old heartbeat. Check basement for previous structures, don't trust the skylight. Weather is for somewhere else. If they use your full name, they know you. How do they know you? Buried deeper in the files, I found something that made my blood run cold. A cartographer's sketch from what looked like the 1940s, showing the area before the mall was built. The drawing overlaid the current floor plan with an older map, a prairie trail that ran east to west, crossing exactly where the main concourse now stretched. and a small cemetery or burial field marked with careful symbols where the food court currently sat. The carousel was positioned directly over what the old map labeled as sacred ground. Burial site disturbed 1974. Construction on the Northline Galleria had begun in 1975. Photographed the sketch with my phone, then continued digging through the files. Deeper in the cabinet, past budget reports and maintenance logs, I found a folder marked Structural Anomalies that contained architectural surveys dating back to the mall's construction. The surveys noted several unexplained issues: foundations settling in geometric patterns, electrical systems that drew power from unknown sources, and acoustic anomalies that made certain areas of the mall perfect echo chambers, while others absorbed sound completely. One report from 1978 mentioned recurring issues with the cinema complex, particularly the interior fire doors, showing stress patterns consistent with sustained pressure from inside the theaters, despite the spaces being empty and locked. The report was signed by an engineer whose signature had faded to illegibility, but someone had written in the margin, "They want out, but they can't leave." I closed the files and sat back in the office chair, trying to process what I was learning. The mall hadn't just been built on disturbed ground. It had been built to contain something. The rules weren't protection. They were a feeding schedule, a maintenance protocol for keeping whatever lived in the Northline Galleria satisfied with small offerings instead of larger hungers. My radio crackled to life. "Security, this is maintenance. We've got reports of sounds from the cinema area. Can you investigate?" I checked my watch. 3:29 a.m., 4 minutes early, but close enough to rule number 4 to make me nervous. I gathered my flashlight and radio and headed for the Sunset Cinemas complex. The cinema occupied the mall's north wing, a multiplex that had shown its last movie in 2003. The main entrance was secured with a rolling gate that had been tagged so many times the original color was anyone's guess. But there was a fire exit at the back that provided access for security checks. The door was heavy steel painted institutional green, with a lock that required 2 keys turned simultaneously, one held by security, one by maintenance. As I approached the door, I could see why the engineer's report had mentioned stress patterns. Deep gouges scored the interior surface of the door in parallel arcs, like massive fingernails had been dragged across the metal. The gouges were too wide and too deep to have been made by human hands, and they followed the same curved pattern, as if something had been trying to claw its way out of the theater complex. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the knocking began, 4 measured taps, a pause, then 4 again. The sound came from inside the theater complex, echoing off the empty concessions area and through the fire door. The knocks were deliberate, patient, like someone following a protocol they'd learned by heart. Rule number 4 was specific: count to 40 before unlocking. Never count out loud. I started counting silently, my heartbeat trying to drum me into saying the numbers aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4. The knocking continued its rhythm, and I realized it was perfectly timed to my count. 4 knocks, pause, 4 knocks, pause, as if whatever was inside could hear my thoughts. 15, 16, 17. The knocking changed. Instead of the measured taps, I heard a voice from inside the theater complex. My sister Emma's voice, young and frightened. "Marcus, please. I'm scared. Why won't you open the door?" My hand moved toward the key without conscious thought. Emma was safe at home, asleep in her bed, protected by normal locks and ordinary walls. But her voice from inside the sealed theater was so clear, so genuine, that my body wanted to respond regardless of what my brain knew to be true. 28, 29, 30. "Marcus, I can't find you. Where are you? Please help me." Emma's voice grew more distressed, more urgent. The sound seemed to come from multiple speakers throughout the theater complex, as if she was running from screen to screen, calling for help. 35, 36, 37. Every instinct I had screamed at me to open the door, to rescue my sister from whatever had trapped her in a place she couldn't possibly be. The keys felt heavy in my hand, and I could feel myself starting to turn them before I reached 40, 38. "Marcus, something's wrong. I need you. I need you now." But there was something off about the voice now, something too perfect about the distress, as if it had been recorded and was being played. back at precisely the right moments, 39:40, turned both keys simultaneously, and pulled the fire door open. The theater complex exhaled stale air that smelled of old popcorn and industrial carpet cleaner. Emergency lighting cast red shadows across the lobby area, illuminating a concessions counter that still held promotional materials for movies that had been released 20 years ago. No one was inside. No Emma, no source for the voice I'd heard. But draped over one of the theater seats in Cinema 3 was a child's denim jacket, small enough to fit a 10-year-old, damp as if it had been worn outside in recent rain. The jacket was familiar, not identical to anything Emma owned, but close enough to make my chest tight with recognition. I didn't touch the jacket. Instead, I backed out of the theater complex and locked the door, my hands shaking as I turned the keys. Whatever lived in the Sunset Cinemas had learned to use voices I would recognize, needs I would respond to, but it hadn't learned to be subtle about the performance. When I stepped back into the main concourse, a child mannequin stood 20 feet away from me, exactly where the empty space had been when I'd entered the theater. It was perhaps 4 feet tall, dressed in department store clothing that looked decades out of date, with painted features that achieved an uncanny valley of realism. Its lashes were detailed enough to count individually, and its mouth was shaped in a small, knowing smile. Rule number 5. If you find a child mannequin standing in the concourse, turn it to face the service corridor. Don't look away until it's finished turning back. I approached the mannequin carefully, the way you might approach a wild animal that was pretending to be tame. Its plastic skin was warm under my hands, not with the ambient temperature of the mall, but with something that felt disturbingly like body heat. I gripped its shoulders and turned it to face the service corridor that led to the loading docks. As soon as I released it, the mannequin began to turn itself back around. Not with mechanical precision, but with the slow, deliberate movement of something that was choosing to move. Its head rotated smoothly on its neck, the painted eyes tracking across the empty mall until they found my face. I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I watched as the mannequin completed its full rotation, the smile never changing, the eyes never losing their focus on mine. When it finished turning, it stood perfectly still again, but I could swear I saw its chest rise and fall once, as if it had been holding its breath. Somewhere in the mall's upper reaches, a pigeon fluttered violently against glass or metal, then went quiet. The sound echoed through the empty spaces like applause. I backed away from the mannequin and continued my patrol, but I could feel it watching me from its position in the concourse. In the storefront mirrors I passed, the ones I was careful not to look into directly, I caught glimpses of it turning to track my movement, always facing my direction, always maintaining that small, knowing smile. The mall was learning my patterns, my responses, my weaknesses. It knew about Emma, knew about my need to protect her, knew exactly which voice would make me want to break the rules. And it was patient enough to wait, to test, to gather information for the next time I had to count to 40 before opening a door. By the time I returned to the security office, I understood that the rules weren't just about survival. They were about maintaining a relationship. The mall had needs, and the night guards were there to meet those needs through careful ritual and precise timing. Feed it the right things at the right times, and it would settle for small hungers instead of devouring everything in reach. But if you missed a feeding, if you counted out loud or looked in the wrong mirror or ignored the carousel music, it would remind you that the relationship was not optional, and the consequences for breaking protocol were measured in more than lost jobs. I filed my report for the night and tried not to think about the denim jacket in Cinema 3, or why it had felt familiar, or whose voice the mall might use the next time it wanted me to break the rules. I found May Holloway on my 4th night, sitting at a table in the defunct Orange Julius near the food court, sipping from a thermos and humming along to music only she could hear. She was perhaps 70 years old, wearing a moth-eaten wool coat that had seen better decades, and shoes that looked like they'd walked through every major historical event of the past 50 years. You must be Marcus, she said without looking up as I approached. I heard about the carousel business the other night. Most people run screaming after the music starts. You stayed. That's something. I stopped at what felt like a respectful distance, unsure whether May was a homeless person who'd found a way into the mall or something else entirely. I'm sorry, but you can't be in here. This is private property, and I've been here since Hudson's had a Santa Claus and Montgomery Ward sold appliances that lasted longer than the warranties," May interrupted. "The security company knows I'm here. Building management knows I'm here. I don't cause trouble, don't break anything, don't steal copper pipe or set fires in the fountain. I just sit and keep watch." She gestured toward the carousel with a gnarled hand. "Someone needs to understand the rhythms. Someone needs to know when the feeding times are off. When the weather starts bleeding through too much. When the mirrors start showing places that aren't here." Yet, May was what the incident reports had called the weary witness, someone who'd survived long enough in the mall's ecosystem to understand its patterns, its needs, its moods. She'd learned to read the signs and live within the rules without being consumed by them. "You want to know about the carousel," she said, tapping her thermos against the plastic table. "Why you have to be here for the second refrain. Why it matters if you're late." I sat down across from her, setting my radio and flashlight on the table like offerings. "Tell me." May's eyes were pale blue, the color of winter sky, and they held the weight of someone who'd seen too much and chosen to keep watching anyway. "This place was always hungry," she said. "The stores were just a skin it wore for a while. Before the mall, it was other things. A traveling carnival that stayed too long. A dance hall where people disappeared during the war. A crossroads where the native tribes left offerings to keep the restless dead satisfied." She sipped from her thermos, and I caught the smell of something that wasn't quite coffee, wasn't quite tea, but carried hints of herbs and spices that didn't belong in Michigan. "The carousel came from the carnival," May continued. "1948 to 1962. It spun in a tent where the Spencers used to be. Children rode the horses, and their parents counted the turns, and everyone went home with sticky fingers and stories to tell. But some children stayed for extra rides, and some of those children never went home at all." She pointed toward the carousel with her cup. "When they built the mall, they found the carousel in a storage barn outside Dearborn, still in working condition, despite sitting idle for 12 years. The developer thought it would be a charming centerpiece, something to draw families and create atmosphere. He didn't know that some carousels never really stop spinning, even when the power's off." May explained the carousel music wasn't mechanical. It was a summoning, a call to feed. The children who'd never left the carnival came when they heard the familiar tune, expecting rides and cotton candy and the simple joy of spinning in circles. But the mall had no cotton candy, no carnival games, no parents to take them home when the rides were over. "That's where you come in," May said. "When the music plays, you have to be at the food court by the second refrain. You have to put your hand on the central pole and let them know someone is here, someone is listening, someone cares enough to show up when they call. What happens if I don't?" May's expression darkened. "They get hungry for more than attention. They start looking for playmates who can't leave either. They start visiting people in their dreams, calling to them from mirrors, teaching them games that have no winners." She told me about the mirrors, about the skylights, about all the rules that weren't really rules, but feeding schedules for different aspects of the mall's appetite. The mirrors showed the version of the mall that had gotten what it wanted, a thriving commercial space where the carousel spun endlessly and children never had to go home. The skylights showed weather from other places, other times, other possibilities, where the mall existed under different skies. "Rule number 6 says, don't check your phone for confirmation," May said. "That's because the weather is real, just not here. It's raining in the mall that exists in 1987, snowing in the one from 2003, storming in the one that never lost its anchor stores. Your phone would tell you it's clear outside, but that's just this version of outside. In this version of now." May warned me about the mirrors again, about looking too long at reflections that showed more than they should. Those show the version of here that got what it wanted. If you stare, you teach it your name, your face, your patterns, and once it knows you well enough, it can make you in there. In that other version where you never have to leave your shift. She told me about the cinema knocking, about the voices that called from inside the sealed theaters. "That's the overflow," she said. "The ones who came for movies and stayed for reasons they can't remember. They're not dangerous exactly, but they're confused. They think if they can get someone to open the door, they can remember how to leave. And the mannequins?" May shivered and pulled her coat tighter. Children who rode the carousel too many times. The mall keeps them as decorations now, but they remember being warm, being real. If you turn them toward the service corridor, you remind them there's an exit. But they always turn back because they've forgotten how to use doors. I asked about Darren, about the blinking and the two versions I'd seen. Your friend learned the hard way about Rule No. 8, May said sadly. The mall makes copies when it needs to replace someone who's been used up, but the copies aren't perfect. They blink too much or not enough. They smile wrong. They use your full name because they heard it in the filing system, but don't understand that names have power here. May finished her thermos and screwed the cap back on with arthritic fingers. The rules aren't to protect you from it, she said. They're to feed it the right things, so it leaves the rest of you alone. Keep the music fed with attention. Keep the mirrors fed with reflection. Keep the cinema fed with patience. Give it what it needs when it needs it, and it won't take what you can't afford to lose. She stood up, gathering her coat around her like armor. But don't fool yourself into thinking you're safe. Everyone who works here long enough becomes part of it eventually. The only choice is whether you become part of it on your terms or on its terms. May walked away toward the service corridors, her footsteps echoing off the empty tiles. Before she disappeared into the shadows, she called back, "The mall likes you, Marcus. It's been a long time since someone followed the rules properly, but it's getting hungrier, and hungrier things make different choices. Watch for the signs. And when you see them, decide what you're willing to sacrifice to keep your sister safe." I sat alone at the Orange Julius table, surrounded by the bones of American retail culture, and understood that I wasn't just a security guard patrolling an empty building. I was a priest, tending to something ancient and hungry that had learned to disguise itself as commerce, and my job was to make sure it stayed satisfied with small offerings instead of developing an appetite for larger prey. The carousel horses stared at me from across the food court, their painted eyes reflecting my flashlight beam like stars. Somewhere in the mall's depths a pigeon cooed, and the sound echoed through the empty spaces like a lullaby for something that had never learned to sleep. On my 5th night, the mall began testing my commitment to the rules with surgical precision, using every weakness I'd revealed during our nightly dance of ritual and appeasement. It started at 4:08 a.m., during what should have been the quiet hours when even the mall's hungers settled into dormancy. I was conducting my final patrol circuit, checking the anchor stores and preparing for the shift change that would bring daylight and the illusion of normalcy. The night had been relatively calm. Carousel music at the proper time, mirrors behaving themselves, the cinema knocking right on schedule. Then I heard my name echoing from the East Atrium. "Marcus Hale." "It's Darren, help me, man." The voice carried the distressed urgency of someone in genuine trouble, bouncing off the empty storefronts and broken fountain in acoustic patterns that made it seem like the caller was moving, perhaps running, searching for help in the maze of dead retail space. Rule number 3 burned in my mind. Do not acknowledge anyone calling you by your full name unless they show a valid security badge, but the voice sounded exactly like Darren, not the too careful version that had been wearing his face for the past few nights, but the original Darren, confident and practical and human in ways that couldn't be perfectly imitated. If there was any chance the real Darren was still somewhere in the mall, still trapped in whatever transition had created his replacement, I couldn't just ignore his calls for help. I moved toward the East Atrium, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, radio ready in case I needed backup that wouldn't come. The voice continued calling as I approached. "Marcus Hale over here." "I'm trapped, man. Something's wrong with this place. Really wrong." Near the topped skylight, a figure stood in the pale wash of emergency lighting. It was Darren, or something shaped like Darren, wearing the same maintenance uniform, holding something in his raised hand that flashed when my light hit it. A badge, but not the standard mall security badge. This looked like a mirrored department store loyalty card on a lanyard, reflecting my flashlight beam like a tiny signal mirror. Rule number 3 was specific: valid security badge. Not loyalty card, not name tag, not any piece of reflective plastic that could catch light at the right angle. But as I got closer, I could see through the gaps in the tarp above the figure. The skylight showed heavy snow falling outside, thick, soundless flakes dropping in perfectly vertical lines despite the February night in Detroit being clear. And mild according to my weather app. Rule number 6. The skylight in the east. Atrium shows weather that isn't there. Don't check your phone for confirmation. The rule was clear, but my phone was already in my hand. Weather app loading. Because seeing snow in July was one thing, but seeing snow when your sister walked home from her after-school job was another entirely. I needed to know if Emma was safe, if she was walking through a blizzard I couldn't see from inside the mall. Marcus Hale, please, the figure called, and I could hear desperation in the voice now. Real fear that made my chest tight with the need to respond. I don't know how long I can stay myself. It's changing me, changing my thoughts. Help me before I become like the others. The figure paced under the falling snow that shouldn't exist, and I could see now that it was crying. Real tears, human distress, not the practiced mimicry I'd learned to recognize. If this was the original Darren, somehow fighting off whatever process had created his replacement, then ignoring his pleas made me complicit in his consumption. But if this was the mole's attempt to break my adherence to the rules, to use my conscience against me, then acknowledging him would teach it that emotional manipulation was more effective than simple fear. My phone screen showed clear skies. Temperature 42 degrees. No precipitation expected. The snow falling through the skylight was weather from somewhere else, some other version of the mall where different rules applied and different seasons held sway. Marcus Hale, I can see you there. Why won't you help me? Don't you recognize me? The figure's voice cracked with what sounded like genuine heartbreak. I know I look different, but I'm still me. I'm still your friend. The badge in his hand caught my flashlight beam again, a flash of silver that hurt to look at directly. Not a security badge, not official identification, but something that wanted to be recognized as authority. I made my choice. I tucked my chin down, avoided eye contact with the figure, and did not answer. I did not check my phone again. I kept walking on my patrol route. Following the rules that May had explained were feeding schedules, maintenance protocols for keeping something ancient and hungry satisfied with appropriate offerings. The figure's voice followed me as I walked away. Marcus, please. Oh God, I can feel it happening again. I can feel myself forgetting. Don't leave me here. Don't let me become them. Then the voice changed, becoming layered as if multiple people were speaking in unison. Marcus Hale, we tried to warn you. We tried to be human for you. But you won't feed us what we need. When I looked back, there were 2 silhouettes under the skylight, then 3, then none. The tarp sagged with the weight of accumulating snow that left no trace on the mall floor below. I completed my patrol route in mechanical precision, following the schedule, checking the required locations, maintaining the rhythm that kept the mall's various hungers satisfied. But my hands were shaking, and I could taste copper pennies again, the flavor of crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. In the security office, I filed my report. Routine patrol completed. No incidents. Weather systems functioning normally. The lies came easily now, part of the job, part of the price of keeping the feeding schedule intact. But I kept thinking about the figure's tears, about the desperation in the voice that had sounded so much like someone I'd briefly considered a friend. I kept wondering if I'd just watched the real Darren disappear forever, consumed by my adherence to rules that might have been more flexible than I'd understood. The phone on the desk rang at 4:47 a.m., 12 minutes before the end of my shift. I answered on the 3rd ring. Security desk, Marcus. The voice was my sister Emma's, but wrong, too young, like she was 10 years old again instead of 17. Marcus, I'm scared. I can't find my way home. The snow is so deep and I think I'm lost. I checked the caller ID, unknown number. But Emma's voice continued, small and frightened. I tried to walk home from work, but everything looks different. The streets aren't where they're supposed to be. And there's a man following me. He keeps calling my name, but he doesn't have a badge. My blood turned to ice. Emma, where are you? Are you safe? I'm somewhere with a carousel and the music won't stop playing. There are other children here, but they don't look right. They keep asking me to ride the horses with them. The phone went dead. I grabbed my keys and ran for the exit. Breaking protocol, abandoning my post. Rules forgotten in the face of my sister's voice calling for help. But the mall's exit doors wouldn't open. My security badge had no effect on the locks, and the emergency releases had been disabled. I was trapped until 7 a.m., until my shift officially ended. Until whatever had Emma finished teaching me the cost of caring about someone more than I cared about the feeding schedule. I spent the final hour of my shift in the food court, hand pressed against the carousel's central pole, listening to music that played without power, and watching painted horses that moved when I wasn't looking directly at them. Somewhere in the melody, I could hear children laughing, including one laugh that sounded exactly like Emma at age 10, delighted and innocent and forever beyond my reach. When my replacement arrived at 7 a.m., I called Emma's phone immediately. She answered on the second ring, sleepy and annoyed. "Marcus, what time is it? Why are you calling so early? Are you okay? Are you home?" "Of course I'm home. I'm in bed. Where else would I be at 7 in the morning?" But I could hear carousel music playing faintly in the background of her call, and when I asked her about it, she said she couldn't hear anything unusual. The mall had taught me that rules were more important than compassion, that feeding schedules mattered more than friendship, that some hungers would use any weakness to break your resolve. But it had also taught me that the people I cared about were never really safe, never really beyond its reach, never more than a phone call away from becoming bargaining chips in a game where the rules changed based on how much you were willing to sacrifice. I drove home that morning with carousel music playing softly from my car radio, though I hadn't turned it on, and began planning how to keep Emma safe from something that had learned to use love as a weapon. My 6th night at the Northline Galleria would be my last, though I didn't know it when I clocked in at midnight to find the mall breathing like a living thing. The air moved through the concourses in rhythmic waves, pushing dust motes and scattered papers in patterns that looked almost like respiration. The emergency lighting flickered in sync with the air movement, creating the illusion that the mall's skeleton was expanding and contracting around some massive, hidden heart. May was waiting for me in the security office, perched on the edge of the desk like a gargoyle that had learned to worry. "It's restless tonight," she said without preamble. "The carousel started playing an hour ago and hasn't stopped. The skylights showing weather from 1962, the summer the carnival closed. And I've counted 7 different versions of your cleaner friend wandering around the East Atrium." I checked the monitors. Most of the cameras showed static, but the few working feeds revealed Darren-shaped figures moving through various parts of the mall, all wearing the same maintenance uniform, all carrying the same key ring, all looking slightly wrong in different ways. One blinked too fast, another didn't blink at all. A third walked with mechanical precision, like he'd learned human movement from technical manuals. "The mall's getting impatient," May continued. "It's been feeding on small offerings for weeks now. Attention for the carousel, patience for the cinema, reflection for the mirrors. But it wants something more substantial. Something permanent." She gestured toward the rule sheet pinned to the office wall, now laminated and amended with additional entries in red ink. "The rules are starting to conflict," she said. "That's always the sign that the feeding schedule isn't enough anymore. It wants to upgrade from maintenance to acquisition." As if summoned by her words, carousel music began threading through the mall's sound system, warped and tinny, but unmistakably urgent. Not the gentle, hypnotic melody I'd learned to recognize, but something faster, more insistent, like a heartbeat that had found its rhythm and was accelerating toward some critical threshold. Rule number 2. If the carousel music plays, you must be at the food court by the second refrain. But the music had been playing for over an hour, according to May, cycling through verses and refrains without pause. How do you get to the food court by the second refrain when the song never stops long enough to start over? I grabbed my flashlight and radio and headed for the food court, May following behind with the careful steps of someone who'd learned to navigate haunted spaces. The music grew louder as we approached, no longer coming from speakers but from the carousel itself, the painted horses moving up and down on their brass poles in slow, hypnotic rhythm. Children's laughter echoed from the carousel, but when I looked directly at the horses, they were empty. The laughter came from somewhere else, from the spaces between the horses, from the air above the spinning platform, from dimensions that existed parallel to the physical carousel. "It's calling them," May whispered. "All the children who never went home. They're coming back for the ride they never finished." I approached the carousel and put my hand on the central pole as I'd done before, but this time the brass was warm, pulsing with something that felt disturbingly like a pulse. The music didn't calm at my touch. Instead, it seemed to recognize me, to welcome me, to invite me to climb aboard and take a ride that would last forever. Marcus Hale. The voice came from behind me, using the formal address that Rule Number 3 warned against. I turned to find one of the Darren copies standing at the edge of the food court, wearing a security badge that looked official in the strobing emergency light. "I need to show you something," the Darren copy said, holding up the badge. "About your sister. About what's going to happen to her if you keep following these rules." My blood turned to ice water. "What about Emma?" "She's in the system now," the copy said, moving closer with the careful steps of something that had practiced human movement but hadn't quite mastered it. "The mall knows about her, knows her voice, knows her fears. Every night you spend here, you teach it more about what you care about, what you'd sacrifice the rules to protect." The copy gestured toward the carousel, where I could now see a small figure riding one of the horses, a girl with Emma's face but younger, the age she'd been when our mother was still healthy, and I was still just her big brother instead of her guardian. "She's already here," the copy continued. "The version of her that would choose the carousel over going home, the version that would stay for just one more ride. All we need is for you to acknowledge that she's real, to call her name, to break Rule Number 3 just once." I looked at the security badge in the copy's hand. It was identical to mine, complete with photo and identification number, but the photo showed Darren's face on my badge, as if the mall had filed him under my name, made him my replacement in its bureaucracy. From across the food court, I heard knocking, the familiar four-tap rhythm that preceded the cinema opening. But it was early, only 3:29 by my watch, and the sound was coming from multiple directions. Every storefront, every service door, every entrance to the mall was echoing with the patient, measured knocking of whatever lived in the spaces between retail and reality. Rule Number 4, at 3:33 a.m., count to 40 before unlocking. Never count out loud. But how do you count to 40 when every surface in the mall is knocking, when the rhythm is designed to make you lose track, when the carousel music is trying to rewrite your heartbeat to match its own hypnotic tempo? I started counting silently, but the mall seemed to hear my thoughts anyway. The knocking synchronized with my count, turning my mental rhythm into an audible drumbeat that echoed through the empty concourses. 1, 2, 3, 4, knock, 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 knock. The mall was learning my internal patterns, matching its appetite to my thoughts. "You can't count silently when the place can hear your heartbeat," the Darren copy said with something that might have been sympathy. "And you counted wrong at the cinema that first night, didn't you? 41, maybe 42. It's been waiting for you to make the same mistake again. 26, 27, 28. The knocking grew more insistent, and I could hear voices now from behind every door. Emma's voice, my mother's voice before the stroke, the voices of everyone I'd ever cared about calling for help, calling my name, begging me to open doors that should stay closed. The child mannequin appeared beside the carousel, no longer hiding its mobility. It walked with jerky, unnatural movements toward the spinning platform, reaching up toward the small figure that wore Emma's face. Its painted smile had widened, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too white, too eager. 34, 35, 36. The Darren copy stepped closer, badge extended like an offering. "Just acknowledge me," he said. "Just say my name, validate my authority, and I'll stop the mannequin from reaching her. I'll keep the painted children away from your real sister." 37. The mannequin's fingers touched the carousel horse, where the Emma figure sat laughing with the pure joy of a child who'd found the perfect ride. Its touch left dark marks on the painted wood, stains that looked like old blood or fresh tar. 38. I had to choose follow Rule Number 3 and let whatever was going to happen to the Emma figure happen, or acknowledge the Darren copy's authority and hope he could stop something that might not even be real. 39. The mannequin began climbing onto the carousel, its movements becoming more fluid, more human-like, as if it was remembering how to be a real child through proximity to the Emma figure. 40. I made my choice. I kept my mouth shut, did not acknowledge the Darren copy, and instead approached the carousel directly. I grabbed the mannequin by its shoulders and turned it to face the service corridor, following Rule Number 5 exactly as written. But this time, the mannequin fought back. Its plastic hands clawed at my arms, leaving scratches that burned like acid touches. Its painted mouth opened to reveal a throat that descended into darkness, and sounds came out that no human child had ever made. Hunting calls, feeding sounds, the acoustic signature of something that had learned to mimic innocence without understanding what innocence meant. I held on, forcing the mannequin to face the service corridor while it thrashed and clawed and made sounds that would give me nightmares for the rest of my life. Around us, the carousel continued spinning, the music building to some crescendo that would either save us or damn us all. The mannequin suddenly went limp in my hands, becoming just painted plastic again. But when I released it, instead of turning back toward the carousel as it had always done before, it walked toward the service corridor with the mechanical steps of something that had learned to obey. The Emma figure on the carousel horse faded like smoke, becoming just another painted decoration on just another amusement park ride. The knocking stopped. The voices went silent. The music wound down to its normal hypnotic tempo. The Darren copy stared at me with something that might have been respect. "You chose the rules over everything else," he said. "Even over her. She wasn't real," I said, though my voice shook with the uncertainty of someone who'd gambled everything on being right about what was real and what was simulation. "No," the copy agreed, "but she could have been. That's what the mall does. It offers you versions of reality where the people you love never have to leave, never have to grow up, never have to face anything worse than choosing which painted horse to ride." The copy faded like fog, becoming translucent, then invisible, leaving only the echo of his voice. "The rules saved you tonight, Marcus. But rules change when the things they're feeding get hungry enough. Watch for the updates." I spent the rest of my shift in the security office, writing my resignation letter, and trying not to think about the choice I'd made, about whether saving myself from the mall's version of eternity was worth abandoning everyone who might still be trapped in its painted paradise. When my replacement arrived at 7 a.m., I handed him the keys, the radio, the laminated rule sheet, and a warning: follow these exactly. Don't improvise, don't interpret, don't think you know better. And if you see two of the same person, the one that blinks is the one you ignore. He looked at the rules and laughed. "What is this, a joke? Never feed the pigeons?" I walked away without answering, because some lessons can only be learned through experience, and some people are destined to become object lessons for whoever comes after them. As I drove away from the Northline Galleria, I could see carousel horses in my rearview mirror, spinning against the morning sky, carrying riders who had chosen the eternal ride over the uncertain journey home. 3 weeks after I quit the Northline Galleria, the mall found me anyway. I'd taken a day shift at a warehouse in Dearborn, steady work with normal hours that let me be home when Emma got back from school. The work was boring, predictable, safe, everything the mall had not been. I convinced myself I'd escaped. That distance and daylight had severed whatever connection I'd formed with that hungry place and its endless appetite for human attention. Then the carousel music started, playing from my car radio. It began as background noise during my morning commute, so faint I almost missed it, under the talk radio and traffic reports. But by the third day it was unmistakable. The same hypnotic melody that had summoned me to the food court, now threading through every radio station I tried to tune in. The music followed me home, playing from Emma's alarm clock, from the television speakers between programs, from my phone when it wasn't connected to any audio source. Soft, patient, persistent. A reminder that some relationships don't end just because you change jobs. Emma noticed first. "Is that carnival music?" she asked one evening, pausing in her homework to listen to the faint melody drifting from the kitchen radio. "I don't hear anything," I lied, though the music was clear enough to count the beats, to anticipate the refrain that would signal the second verse. But Emma was already walking toward the radio, drawn by the same hypnotic quality that had made children climb aboard painted horses for generations. "It's pretty," she said, reaching for the volume knob. "Like something from when I was little." I knocked her hand away from the radio with more force than necessary, earning a startled look and a question I couldn't answer. "Marcus, what's wrong with you?" That night, I drove back to the Northline Galleria. The parking lot was empty except for a security company van that I didn't recognize and a few cars that looked like they'd been abandoned rather than parked. The mall's exterior showed new signs of decay. more broken windows, graffiti that had evolved from territorial tags to something that looked almost like writing in a language I didn't recognize. But the red keyhole symbols were still there, painted over and painted again, as if they were too important to erase completely. I didn't go inside. I couldn't go inside. I'd broken that relationship when I'd chosen to leave, and some doors don't open twice for the same person. But I sat in my car in the parking lot and watched the windows looking for signs of movement, evidence of whatever was happening to my replacement. At 2:17 a.m., the windows began to glow, not with electric light but with something softer, more organic, like candlelight or fireflies or the bioluminescence of deep-sea creatures. The glow moved through the mall's interior, flowing from storefront to storefront like liquid light, following patterns that suggested a circulation system, a metabolism, a living thing processing nutrients through specialized organs. The carousel music in my car radio grew louder, and I could see shapes moving behind the glowing windows, figures that walked with the measured pace of security guards on patrol, but there were too many of them, and they all moved in perfect synchronization, following the same route at the same time, like a single consciousness distributed across multiple bodies. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Security desk," said a voice that sounded like mine but wasn't quite right. Too formal. Too careful with pronunciation, like someone reading from a script. "This is Marcus Hale," I said, "former night security supervisor." "Yes, Mr. Hale, we have your file. Your replacement has been integrated successfully." The transition was much smoother than previous installations. I could hear carousel music in the background of the call, and what sounded like children laughing, and the distant echo of knocking from sealed doors. What happened to him? He followed the rules, exactly as written, never deviated, never improvised, never chose human feeling over protocol compliance. He was perfect material for permanent assignment. The voice paused, and I could hear papers rustling as if someone was consulting files. "We wanted to thank you for the excellent training you provided. Your adherence to the feeding schedule during your employment created optimal conditions for staff retention. We rarely achieve such complete integration on the first attempt." "Let him go," I said, though I knew it was pointless. He doesn't know what he signed up for. Oh, but he does now. He knows everything. He's part of the institutional memory, part of the collective knowledge that keeps them all functioning optimally. He's happier than he's ever been. In the background of the call, I heard a voice that might have been my replacement saying, "Routine patrol completed. All areas secure. Beginning next cycle." The voice on the phone continued. "We're calling to inform you that your employment benefits package included family coverage. Your sister Emma has been pre-approved for our youth development program. She shows excellent potential for permanent placement." My blood turned to ice. "Stay away from her. Mr. Hale, you misunderstand. We're not taking her. We're offering her a choice. Every night she hears the carousel music. Every night. She dreams of painted horses and rides that never end. Eventually she'll choose to visit us, just to see if the music is as beautiful in person as it is in her dreams." The call ended. I drove home at dangerous speeds, running red lights and stop signs, my car radio playing carousel music loud enough to drown out my own thoughts. Emma's bedroom light was on when I pulled into the driveway, and I could see her silhouette at the window, looking out at something I couldn't see. When I got inside, she was standing in the living room wearing her coat and shoes, car keys in her hand. "I have to go somewhere," she said, her voice distant and dreamy. "There's music playing, and I think someone's waiting for me." I took the keys from her hand and guided her back to her bedroom, talking her through breathing exercises until the distant look faded from her eyes and she focused on my face. "Marcus," she said, confused. "Why am I dressed? What time is it?" "It's late," I said. "You were sleepwalking," but I knew it wasn't sleepwalking. It was the mall's patient hunger, extending its reach through radio waves and dream sequences, teaching her to want things she'd never wanted before, to hear music that called to the part of every person that had once been a child with simple desires and endless trust. I spent the rest of the night sitting in Emma's room, listening to carousel music play from sources that shouldn't have been able to produce sound, watching my sister sleep and dream of painted horses that rose and fell in mechanical perfection. The next morning, I found May Holloway's phone number in the incident reports I'd taken from the security office. It took 3 days to reach her, but when she answered, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd been expecting the call. "The music's following you home," she said without preamble. "How do I stop it?" May was quiet for a long time, and I could hear the distant sound of carousel music through her phone too. "You don't stop it," she said finally. "You make a trade. The mall took your replacement because you trained him to follow the rules perfectly. It's offering to take your sister because she's young enough to enjoy the rides without asking questions. But it might be willing to accept a different arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "The kind where you come back. Not as a security guard. It doesn't need security guards anymore. As something else. Something that helps it expand its reach, find new locations, new people who might benefit from never having to leave." May explained that the mall was growing, establishing connections with other abandoned retail spaces, teaching them to hunger for the things people lost when childhood ended and adult responsibilities began. It needed representatives, ambassadors, people who understood both the human world and the mall's particular appetites. "You could protect Emma by making sure the mall never needs her," May said. "Feed it other offerings. Bring it other people who might choose painted horses over real horses, to carousel music over silence. You're asking me to become a recruiter. I'm asking you to choose which sacrifice you can live with." I hung up without answering. But I kept her number, and I keep listening to the carousel music that plays from every speaker in my life, reminding me that some choices are just delayed consequences. Emma still hears the music. She still dreams of rides that never end. And every night I sit in her room and keep watch, making sure she doesn't choose to follow the music back to its source. But I know that eventually I'll have to choose between protecting her and protecting everyone else who might hear the carousel calling, because some hungers don't go away when you refuse to feed them. They just get patient enough to wait for you to get tired of fighting. The mall taught me that rules are just structured, ways of giving something what it wants, and sometimes the most important rule is knowing when to break all the others to keep the people you love from learning that painted horses are more reliable than real ones. And carousel music never breaks your heart the way real life does. I still have May's number. I still listen to the music. And I still have to decide what I'm willing to sacrifice to keep Emma from choosing the eternal ride over the uncertain journey home. Some nights, when the music is particularly clear, and I can hear children laughing in the background of radio static, I think the choice has already been made for me, and I'm just waiting for the courage to follow through. 6 months after I quit the Northline Galleria, I found myself training my replacement's replacement in a security office that had grown by 3 filing cabinets and a coffee machine that actually worked. His name was Tyler Manning, fresh out of high school with the kind of bright confidence that comes from never having worked anywhere that required rules beyond show up on time and don't steal anything. The security agency had told him it was a straightforward gig. Patrol an empty mall, keep vagrants out. Make sure nobody was burning shopping carts or dealing drugs in the anchor stores. They hadn't mentioned the rules, so this is pretty simple, Tyler said, adjusting his new security uniform and examining the radio that would become his lifeline. Walk around, check doors, write reports. I can handle that. I pulled out the laminated rule sheet, now expanded to 11 items, with additions written in red ink by whoever had been updating the protocols. Northline Galleria. Night security protocols do not. Look into storefront mirrors after 2:17 a.m. If the carousel music plays, you must be at the food court by the second refrain. Do not acknowledge anyone calling you by your full name unless they show a valid security badge. At 3:33 a.m., you will hear knocking from inside the Sunset Cinemas. Count to 40 before unlocking. Never count out loud. If you find a child mannequin standing in the concourse, turn it to face the service corridor. Don't look away until it's finished turning back. The skylight in the east atrium shows weather that isn't there. Don't check your phone for confirmation. Never feed the pigeons. If you see 2 of the same person, the one that blinks is the one you ignore. If a co-worker returns without the stain on his collar, do not let him into the office. The orange Julius thermos belongs to May. Do not move it or drink from it. If the radio plays carousel music, you are being monitored. Wave at the nearest security camera. Tyler read through the list and did exactly what I'd done, what every guard before me had probably done. He laughed. What is this? Some kind of hazing thing? To never feed the pigeons. What am I, a park ranger? He shook his head, grinning. Come on, man. What's the real story here? Is this place supposed to be haunted or something? I looked at Tyler's clean uniform, his unmarked hands, his eyes that hadn't learned to track movement in peripheral vision or identify the sound of footsteps that belonged to people who weren't entirely there. I remembered being that confident, that certain that reality operated under consistent rules and reasonable explanations. They're not suggestions, I said, my voice flat with the weight of knowledge I couldn't transfer through words alone. Follow them exactly as written. Don't improvise, don't interpret. Don't think you know better. Okay, but seriously, Tyler started. They're not for you, I interrupted, echoing May's words from months earlier. They're for them all. They're feeding instructions, maintenance protocols, ways to keep something hungry satisfied with small offerings instead of larger appetites. Tyler's grin faded slightly, but the skepticism remained. You're really selling this haunted mall thing, aren't you? What happened? Did you watch too many horror movies during your shifts? I could have shown him the photographs on my phone, the mannequin that appeared in different locations throughout the night, the skylight that showed weather from other decades, the carousel horses that moved when no one was watching. I could have played him the audio recordings of voices calling from sealed theaters, or the radio static that resolved into children's laughter when you listened closely enough. But some lessons can only be learned through experience. And some people are destined to become object lessons for whoever comes after them. Instead, I handed him the keys, the radio, the flashlight that would become his weapon against shadows that moved independently of their sources. The last guy lasted exactly 6 weeks, I said. The one before him made it 3 nights. The one before that requested transfer after his first shift and spent 2 weeks in psychiatric evaluation. What happened to them? I thought about my replacement, the eager young man who'd followed the rules so perfectly that the mall had decided to make his employment permanent. I thought about Darren, existing now as multiple copies that wandered the East Atrium in shifts, some blinking too much, others not blinking at all. I thought about the children who'd chosen carousel rides over growing up, and the adults who'd found jobs they could never leave. They became part of the maintenance crew, I said. Tyler laughed nervously. You're really committing to this bit, aren't you? Check in with me after your first week, I said, gathering my jacket and keys. If you're still you. As I walked toward the exit, Tyler called after me. Hey, what if I don't believe in any of this supernatural stuff? What if I just do my job and ignore the weird list? I paused at the security office door, looking back at the young man who reminded me of myself, before I'd learned that some buildings are hungrier than others, that some jobs require feeding things that exist in the spaces between what's real and what's profitable. Then you'll learn why the rules exist, I said. And the mall will learn whether you're supervisor material or just another offering. I left Tyler in the security office, reading through the rules one more time, probably still convinced that he was being hazed by co-workers with overactive imaginations. In a few hours, he'd begin his first patrol, walking through concourses that had learned to hunger for human attention, past storefronts that reflected more than they should, toward a food court where painted horses waited for riders who would never have to go home. The carousel music started playing from my car radio as I drove away from the North Line Galleria, soft and hypnotic and patient. In the rearview mirror, I could see the mall's windows beginning their nightly glow, the circulation of light that indicated feeding time, the moment when the building's true purpose emerged from behind its retail camouflage. My phone rang as I reached the first traffic light. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Mr. Hale? The voice was young, eager, slightly nervous. This is Tyler Manning. I know you just left, but I have to ask. Rule number 7. Never feed the pigeons. I mean, they're just birds, right? What's the worst that could happen? I could hear carousel music in the background of his call, and the distant sound of footsteps on tile floors, and something that might have been children laughing, or might have been pigeons cooing, or might have been the sound that hunger makes when it's learning new forms. Tyler, I said, whatever you do, don't... The line went dead. I sat at the traffic light for a long time, listening to carousel music play from every speaker in my car, watching the mall's glow in my rearview mirror pulse like a heartbeat that was accelerating toward some critical rhythm. Behind me, a car honked. The light had turned green. Time to go home to check on Emma, to make sure she was still choosing real life over painted horses and eternal rides. But I kept Tyler's number in my phone, just in case he lasted long enough to learn the difference between following rules and feeding something that had been hungry since before retail spaces were invented to contain it. Some lessons can only be taught through experience. Some people are destined to become object lessons, and some jobs are less about security and more about maintenance, keeping ancient hungers satisfied with appropriate offerings so they don't develop appetites for things you can't afford to lose. The carousel music followed me home, patient and persistent, reminding me that some relationships survive job changes, and some hungers never forget the people who've learned to feed them properly. In my rearview mirror, the Northline Galleria pulsed with bioluminescent light, digesting another offering, growing stronger, preparing to teach a new security guard the rules that aren't suggestions, the protocols that aren't hazing, the feeding schedule that keeps something ancient and patient satisfied with small hungers instead of devouring everything in reach. Tyler would learn, one way or another. They all did, eventually. The question was whether he'd learn fast enough to remain himself, or whether the mall would file him under permanent assignment and start advertising for another security guard with fresh shoes and bright confidence and no understanding of what it means to work somewhere that's been hungry. Longer than America has been a country. I drove home through empty streets, carousel music playing from radios I hadn't turned on, and tried not to think about how many more Tyler Mannings would walk through that security office door. How many more bright young people would laugh at rules they didn't understand? How many more offerings the mall would require before it finally satisfied whatever ancient appetite kept it glowing through the night like a beacon for people who'd forgotten how to leave? Some places never close. They just learn to feed differently, and some security guards learn that the most important part of the job isn't protecting the property. It's making sure the property doesn't decide you're more valuable as a permanent employee than as a temporary contractor. The music played on, patient and hypnotic, following me toward home, and the choice I still had to make. How much I was willing to sacrifice to keep the people I loved from learning that some carousels never stop spinning, and some rides are designed to last forever.